Mark, it's unofficially Twins Week here on Kicking the Seat because later this week we're going to be talking about The Monkey, which
Mm.
involves Theo James as a guy who's playing twin brothers. Actually, it's twins in movies that are adapted from books. Uh, Today we are talking about Constantine, the 2005 movie starring Keanu Reeves, in which Rachel Weisz plays twin sisters. And that's adapted from the DC Vertigo comics, John Constantine Hellblazer. So I don't know what it is in the water, but there's something going on here. It feels cosmically aligned.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I hadn't even drawn that correlation till you just mentioned it. Now that because I saw the monkey last night, and twins. I don't know. They seem to be the thing now.
Yeah. Now, if only we had a third movie to talk about this week involving twins, but I guess that would be triplets. No, two
There you
movies
go.
about twins. That makes it perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I, as the DC shill, I want to ask because Vertigo comics were sort of the dark gothy best friend of DC comics back in the 90s. Did you ever get into Vertigo, or were you more of like a
I
mainline DC guy?
I didn't get into Vertigo. I would say my intro into alternate or graphic, what it quickly became the hot term of graphic novel, which was pretty much used as anything that was a dark comic that was not, DC or Marvel for a while was used in that way. You had Dark Horse Comics, which was the main one I followed, which eventually would get bought by DC, not right away. If I remember correctly, Dark Horse was kind of their own thing for a
Dark Horse
while.
is still an independent label. They didn't get bought out.
Oh, they didn't. I
Um,
thought they did because I saw a lot of, they started doing the crossover stuff, and there was.
it's all weird because we're talking going back 30 years or more.
Yeah.
But they did some crossover stuff, but then also, in the last few years, a lot of the licenses that Dark Horse had that really put them on the map, like Aliens, those got bought by
Mm.
Marvel. And so Marvel
That's
is
right.
doing
Okay.
Marvel's doing a series right now, and it's much better than the title implies, called Aliens versus Avengers.
I saw that. I also saw, and there was also an Aliens versus Superman. It's really weird licensing
Yeah.
that I didn't get into because my pocketbook said you've got enough comics right now, Mark. Even though it would be cool to see those, but yeah, I got into Dark Horse, not so much Vertigo, mostly because the comic store where I was at, they didn't order them a lot
Hmm.
because I don't think there was a lot of demand. So they were there, or if they did get them, they usually were sold out by the time I got there to get my pull list. So I was like, okay, I knew of the properties, including Constantine, but that was the most. I hadn't actually read them. I was reading the Dark Horse stuff because they had Aliens, Terminator, RoboCop, Terminator versus RoboCop, and Aliens versus Terminator. I don't know. They were.
Oh, and the original Aliens versus Predator, which why they didn't just
Yes.
use that comic book as the screenplay for the movie, I'll never know. That's a
I,
mystery for the ages.
I am kicking myself because in college, mother was moving out of the house and said, "Do you want your old comics?" And I'm like, "Nah." And I had the original 6-part full cover art first release of Alien versus Predator, all 6 issues in near mint condition. And yeah.
Well, I still have mine if you ever want to come by and visit. No, sorry, no salt for the wounds. Um, but yeah, I was a big Vertigo guy. I mean, Vertigo had a lot of titles by the time it wrapped up, but
Sure.
the main ones were John Constantine Hellblazer and of course Sandman, which was kind of like the prototype, and Death and all these other things. So I was really big into Hellblazer, and so when I found out that they were going to be making a Hellblazer movie, I got very excited, like incredibly excited, because John Constantine was sort of the ultimate anti-hero. He was this
Right.
chain smoking British blonde guy in a tan trench coat, living in London, just like battling demons and the demons within himself. And he first appeared in the pages of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, that
Mm.
in which he was originally modeled after Sting. So there was something going on in the '80s where everyone wanted their anti-hero guys to be like Sting. Like you look at Dune from David Lynch,
Yeah.
and yeah, there's all sorts of weird stuff going on. But when I found out that the big studio version of it from Warner Brothers was going to be star Keanu Reeves and be set in Los Angeles. I thought, oh, so they're going to have someone playing Constantine and Keanu Reeves is like his sidekick, and he happens to be on an adventure in LA or something. No, oh, Keanu Reeves is playing Constantine. I remember when he did the British accent in that Dracula movie. That was terrible. Oh, wait, he's not even doing that. He's just an American guy now. He's wearing a black jacket and he smokes a lot. Okay, sure. Needless to say, I wasn't bowled over by Constantine 20 years ago. And that's why we're talking about it today, because it's hard to believe it was 20 years ago that Constantine came out. And now Warner Brothers has a 4K release of the movie with a bunch of extra features, all ported over from previous releases. So if you're buying it for the supplementals, hey, you got one too.
I got one too.
Yeah, if you're looking at it for the supplementals, you've seen it all before. But, you know, the sound and picture and all that stuff, it's great. And I will say, maybe it's because I've had 20 years to appreciate the movie as being what it is. I liked it a lot more than I remember the first time around. How about you?
Yeah, it's been a long time since I watched it. I watched it with Honorable Son number one, actually. He sat down and watched it with me, and he thought it was all right. He didn't think, and I was watching it too, and I remember the same things that I really enjoyed about it, I still enjoyed about it. It's still problematic, but for what it was doing, because this came out a year before or 2 years before MCU.
3, because
Three.
Iron
So,
Man was
okay,
in
yeah,
11.
that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, 3 years. I was looking it up. Sorry, 3 years. So, you know, they were trying still. You have that period from the like mid 90s to the mid aughts that they were trying to figure out the comic book thing. And yeah, I love the world that Constantine takes place in. And it's still the same today. I love the mythology in the world. I love the characters around Constantine. Keanu was miscast, but I didn't mind his performance as much this time around, only because we also have a more authentic John Constantine in the Constantine TV show that we had, who also would eventually go on to be in my favorite of the CW shows, Legends of Tomorrow. You had his portrayal, which was far more accurate. So that made, I think, Keanu's a little bit more palatable, because it's like, okay, we got a couple different versions now. This isn't the only sole version. And Keanu was picked because he was the hot topic guy. I mean, he's doing the Matrix. He was one of those things where he was the young guy. He was in a couple of big films where they're like, oh, we could put him in this. I forgot Shia LaBeouf was in this until I saw the text. I'm like, oh shit, that's right, Shia's in this. But yeah, overall, it's not a great film. It was an entertaining film, and a lot of that, again, I like the mythology. I like some of the risks they actually took with this film, and yeah, it was entertaining. I don't feel like I wasted my time. It's not high on the recommendation list, but at the same time, I'm like, it's definitely entertaining. There's a lot to enjoy in this. So,
Tell me about the risks that you.
well, just a
Proceed.
couple of the risks that I think one of them, you get the angel casting of Gabriel.
Mhm.
Who Gabriel, everybody assumes, male angel, but they cast actually quite well Tilda Swinton as the angel Gabriel. And for me, I thought that was a very cool, I thought that was an interesting idea. I thought that was an interesting casting, because she does look, and it's like, that actually fits kind of into how you see some angels portrayed as, androgynous of sorts. I mean, and she played it well, and I say they take risks in that they really did not shy away from the religious aspect of it. If you look at the Constantine, what you have in the TV show and what we get later, they most dive into the occult stuff, but not so much of the actual like Christianity and other religious aspects. Where in this one, now I didn't read the original HELLBLAZER series, so that may have been what it was, but it surprised me how much they confront that, because I'm like, when you get into that territory, you do risk either alienating, turning off, or just downright pissing off your audience. Some audience
Yeah.
members, not everybody, but some. So
Yeah, it's interesting because watching I've become much more religious in the 20 years since this movie came out.
sure.
Um, and what struck me is that it's not it deals with Christianity kind of on the periphery. You've
Yeah.
got the references to the Apocrypha, like the banned books from the Bible, which hold the key to the mystery of what's going on. But then you look at some of the other stuff, and you kind of like arch your eyebrow when they talk about this object, the spear of destiny,
Yes.
which was the spear that pierced Christ on the cross, and famously, like instead of blood coming out, it was water, which is very strange. Well, I think maybe there was like a little bit of blood or something, but it immediately turned to water or something like that. But the idea was, oh, this thing is soaked in Christ's blood. I'm like, how? Um, the other thing is, they're like, oh, it was the spear that killed Jesus. No, I'm pretty sure it was being hung up on a cross for a day with nails, going through your wrists and feet after having been mercilessly beaten for several hours and whipped. That kind of stuff. It's just I don't get the feeling that anybody involved, was Catholic or religious. It feels very much like stuff they would have read in comic books, which is fine because they're adapting comics.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting plot. Going back to the Tilda Swinton thing, I think it was, perfect casting. A, because she's a great actress, and B, this is something that was kind of floated around the Vertigo series. I want to say it was in Hellblazer, possibly Sandman. They kind of blend together because there was some crossover there, especially in like the writing teams. But the Angels were kind of drawn as being these, in sort of an androgynous, thing, kind of like the demons as well. Sometimes they were very distinctly male and female, depending on what the story needed them to do or be. But yeah, I remember when I first saw that 20 years ago, I didn't think anything of it. Um, because yeah, I think going from the comics, there was always that sort of ambiguity,
Sure.
and when they leaned into that, I thought was kind of brilliant. Um, Flash forward to 2025, I think there might have been more of an outcry or something, but that's fine. We're in the era we're in, and that was then, this is now, which I think an Emilio Estevez movie. But yeah, and Shia LaBeouf, that's interesting too, because we talked about on your show a few weeks ago, Spring Breakers,
Mhm.
the Harmony Korine movie, where there was a number of like Disney, ABC family kind of starlets who are trying to break out of that teen mold and show that they were all mature and stuff. And there seems to be a formula or a pattern with especially, female like actresses
Mhm.
doing that. They become very sexual in terms of trying to break out and prove themselves to be adults. Here, Shia LaBeouf was coming off of, he was a couple years out of Even Stevens. I think he had done Holes like
Mhm.
around this time, another kids movie. This was an R-rated, kind of adult comic book movie, but he's still playing the funny sidekick with a little bit of dramatic hero purpose at the end, but it didn't feel exploitive. And I just
Mhm.
kind of wish there were more, that was more than the norm or the perception in Hollywood for actresses as it is kind of for guys. Like, no, you just find a really good part and dig into it. That's how you mature.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that there's that kind of double standard with that because there have been a few actresses who tried to break out of that Disney mold or whatnot and just, couldn't or get that, that young adult uh, uh, baggage with them when they try to want to be older performers and they want to take more mature roles. It's like, yeah, like just like you said, it's unfortunate that it's there. I wish it would change because there's a lot of talented actresses there that didn't need to be sexualized that ended up that way. And then here, yeah, Shy's just in this mature, which my kid liked his character quite a bit. Chaz, he's like, I wanted to see more of Chaz. He's like, he got into Chaz's character. Now I did too, actually. I'm like, wow, this is a little bit different Shy than he's not nearly wiki level here.
Well, because this is still 2 years before. It's weird, right? Because
Yeah.
in this movie, I don't know how old his character is supposed to be. He's like driving around a New York cab and helping out. I'm like, is he supposed to be 20? But then 2 years later, he's in Transformers, where he's playing like a high school junior. I don't know what's going on with this guy.
Well, you can do that when you look young as him. He could probably still play a high school kid if he really wanted to.
No, he's been through some stuff, man.
He does have been through some stuff, though. Yeah.
By the way, recommendation for you or for anybody else out there watching it, if you really want a good Shia LaBeouf, like a really great Shia LaBeouf performance, there's a movie that came out a few years ago called Honey Boy, and
Oh, I heard about
uh,
that. Yeah.
it's a semi-autobiographical story about a
Mhm.
kid who gets into Hollywood and has a rough relationship with his dad, and Shia LaBeouf plays the character who is the abusive, kind of screwed up father.
Oh,
It's like
wow.
it's like you could sit on Freud's couch with this guy for like 20 years and still never crack the answer, but it's a great movie. But yeah, Chaz is interesting because, and this is, I think, the first time when I watched this movie, there were like alarm bells going off left and right because in the comic books, Chaz is the guy who kind of drives John around and does like errands for him, but he's a
Right.
grown man. He's like a 35, 40-year-old like footballer from the UK who's this big burly dude. He's not dumb, but he's just not into all the stuff that Constantine's in. He's like, I don't know what I'm doing for you, mate, but
Sure.
just try not to get me in too much trouble with my wife. And now we have this, 17-year-old kid driving a cab. I'm like, you're all left field, but yeah, still entertaining in its own right. And again, knowing what the movie is, I can come back to it. I only needed 2 decades to cool off to come back and appreciate it.
Yeah, and again, I think I softened a little bit on the film too versus when I first saw it, and especially now because, as you say, well, in 20 years the landscape has changed in comic book films and just this type of film in general. What surprised me in it, watching it again, is, and maybe it's because of the 4K restoration, but some of the scenes, the CGI shows its age, but then
Mhm.
some of the scenes actually look pretty solid. Yeah, and I'm like, like, when he takes out, Balthazar,
Mhm.
and Balthazar's pieces are sitting there talking, and I'm like, "That looks actually pretty damn cool, actually."
Yeah, and this goes back into the mythology. Like Balthazar
Mhm.
is a demon who's well, he's a half breed, like
Half-breed, yeah.
much like Gabriel, which is odd because Gabriel is supposed to be an angel, but she's been granted license to roam around on Earth. I guess the deal
Right.
is the hardcore like soul ripping demon minions, they exist in hell just like as regular angels, I guess, exist in heaven, but they're these sort of agents who are able to come and influence people on Earth because at some point God and the devil made a bet about who could influence humanity into coming over to one side or the other. And the catalyst for this movie is someone has tipped the scales and is allowing demons to cross over and not just influence but attack human beings, and that's where kind of Constantine comes in. Plus there's the spear of destiny, which is dug up in the Mexican desert by a guy. He finds it rooting around for trash or something, and he finds this thing wrapped in a Nazi flag because it disappeared after World War II. And he brings it to America and then sets off the steps to the apocalypse. That's the broad strokes. The thing
Yeah.
with the twins is Rachel Weisz plays she's a cop, right?
Mhm.
And she's got her name is Angela. She's got a sister um, who commits suicide by jumping off of a
Yeah.
building in a hospital. She's had a long history of psychological trouble. Turns out it's because she and her sister are both psychic and they can see things and read people. But Angela kind of denied her abilities at a younger age and left her sister to kind of go crazy, and the sister ends up being a pawn in this game. And it gets a little bit convoluted, but it's still pretty entertaining, I think, largely because of the performances. Rachel Weisz, I think, does a great job of managing that duality between the cop and the troubled sister.
Yeah, no, she played it well. I forgot that she was a twin in this. Actually, when I was watching it, I forgot the twin angle,
Me too.
and I think she does it well. And they also do a good job in the costuming and makeup and everything to separate the two, so they don't look like exactly the same. But it is the same actress playing both roles. But it just, they did well with it. But yeah, I think she does well. I think she's holding back a little bit with her scenes with Keanu, so she does it.
Laugh? No.
But she does well. She helps. make a couple of scenes because yeah, her performance overall is solid in here for sure, entertaining, and you could tell she helps Keanu occasionally with this. So
Very much, and it's it's one of those weird things where he has a certain look and,
mhm.
he looks totally badass when he's, like, flipping the lighter and lighting the cigarette and inhaling and, he just doesn't give a shit. He's got that great kind of like an occultist James Dean kind of vibe going
Yeah.
on, but then he opens his mouth and it's just really hit or miss. Like, I'm talking like a 70-30 ratio here.
His line delivery isn't always the best in the film, no, and I don't know how much of that is him and just direction. Because we've seen Keanu, even in his younger stuff, if he's got the right director, I think it really boils down to that and possibly the screenplay with it. The dialogue in this isn't exactly the best. I think you hit it in that I feel like the adapters of this skimmed through the comics,
Oh, yeah.
but didn't really read the comics. And that's the feeling of some of the dialogue here. It's like, wow, yeah, it could have used as you say, could have used a once over, I think, yet for some of this, because some of it was a little too on the nose, and they needed to give Keanu a little bit more help because don't get me wrong, I've always liked Keanu. I liked him since I first saw him in Bill and Ted's.
Mhm.
I just think that the roles that he has taken aren't always the best fit for him, and if it's not quite a good fit, you need a good director to make that fit, and I don't think he had that here.
Well, it's weird because I put it more down to just the confluence of the actor and the material, because I think Francis Lawrence did a hell of a job, no pun intended, directing this movie. There were some things that when I watched it again, because I hadn't revisited it in
Right.
20 years, I was surprised. I'm like, "Oh, that's right. Here's the bit where they're, walking along a corridor and all of a sudden Rachel Weisz gets blown out of this wall and, like,
Yeah.
flown through other buildings." And there's that great today it would have been a drone shot, but this looked like, and it's hard to put that out of your head, like, oh, they did that with a drone. No, this is like a like a helicopter with a mounted camera, like pulling away from Keanu Reeves, like looking up at the sky and like
Mhm.
wondering where his would-be girlfriend went. And I also like that it's a very practical movie in terms
Yes.
of they
Yeah.
they really did a great job of making this Los Angeles look grimy and sad, like almost like they wanted to do the London sets that they would have done for the authentic story, but put that in LA. There's a great bowling alley where one of John's friends and contacts lives
Mhm.
behind the lanes, and it's full of all this like weird bottles and lights hanging from the ceiling, all this kind of arcana. You could watch this, especially in stunning 4K, and just freeze frame it and just like marvel at the details that we don't get a lot in movies anymore.
Oh no, the production design of all the sets were amazing in this. All the set pieces they had in here were really well done, really well put together. Um, Even when we get into the club, uh when we get into the club that we have, which for the mature subject matter that this is, they play it fairly safe
Yeah.
with this, surprisingly. Yeah, I mean, it I honestly think that today this film would have been rated PG-13 and not rated R, in all honesty, because watching it, I'm like, "Oh yeah, this is R." Because because there really isn't a whole lot in here, um, that nowadays it seems a bit tame as far as some of the stuff here for it being R, but I imagine it's the demonic stuff in that. But even when you get into the club scene, I love the design of that. It's got its character. It fits the was it uh the main guy who runs the club,
Oh, Papa Midnight, yeah.
Papa Midnight. It fits his character, like you said, Beeman, the guy who is the M for Constantine, basically, which
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
outfits him with the arcane protection stuff. His area looks like what his character would have. So yeah, for the production designers that they had, they really put in some work, even in the CGI part when they're doing hell. What's interesting is their portrayal of hell, and it brought me to thinking of the movie Drive Angry, which I love. Drive Angry. I love Drive
Mm.
Angry a lot with Nicolas Cage, which also dealt with the occult. Their portrayal of hell, while it was more red than brown in this one, it was fairly similar with the high winds that I'm like, these two could almost be in the same world of sorts.
Yeah,
But
yeah, it's like a mirror version of Los Angeles. Like
right.
everything is, even the landmarks and everything, but everything's on fire. And I liked that the kind of the demon minions were running
Mhm.
rampant on the streets, but then you do a quick kind of look down below, like into the sewers, and that's where everyone's being tormented and ripped apart very quickly. Oh, side note, Drive Angry. I saw that movie, and that is the perfect description for what I did coming home from the theater. Anyway,
See, that's why people are surprised because you and I, our tastes run a bit different sometimes. Because I love Drive Angry, man. I got that just a little bit. Yeah, I got that for $7 actually when it first came out on Blu-ray because Shopko, which is now defunct, hadn't removed their sale price from Black Friday. And when I went over there, I was like, "Ooh!" And it rang up at the full price. And I'm like, "It says $7 on the shelf." Went to customer service, and they're like, "Yeah, give it to them for $7." So, boom.
nice.
Mhm.
Um, no, so the production design is great. It's interesting the story because you said like the people possibly didn't read the comics. I think they did read the comics,
Mm.
but there was some constraint about having to take the particular storylines that they were adapting and weave a master storyline on top with the
Mm.
Spear of Destiny
Sure.
to make it all cohere.
Mhm.
Because some of my favorite stories, including I don't have the original or the first part of the story, but I do have
Mhm.
this graphic novel. It's Rake at the Gates of Hell by Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon, who would go on
Oh,
later to do Preacher, which they also turned into a TV series a few years ago. Um, but in the series that kind of set this one up, or I guess the graphic novel, John Constantine is dying of cancer, which
mm,
is Keanu Reeves' character in this movie finds out that he's terminal, and there's nothing for it, and he knows that based on his life story and all the things he's done, he is damned.
right.
He's going straight to hell when he dies. At the end, the devil himself shows up, played wonderfully by Peter Stormare.
Oh, yeah.
Um, I it's one of I think because people don't really talk about this movie, so I think it gets overlooked in a lot of respects. But this has one of the best character introductions I've ever seen. You talk about the whole R rating thing. I agree. I thought it was a little bit strange when Constantine, for reasons that I'll leave other folks if you haven't seen the movie. We're already kind of talking spoilers, but we
Yeah.
should leave some surprises. He slits his wrists and he's like sitting in this hospital kind of pool area and he's on the floor and he cuts his wrists open. But you see him like pick up the shard of glass because there's broken glass everywhere. And he does it completely off screen. It almost looks like they were doing this so they could show it on television,
Right.
right? You know what he's doing, but they don't get into graphic detail about it. And then as he's sitting there after like a minute or whatever movie time, you see this. You're far away from him, and in the extreme foreground, you see like this black stuff dripping,
Mhm.
dripping, and smoking as it hits the tile. And then you see these feet landing on the tile and then like stepping down, and it cuts to Peter Stormare, the devil, wearing an all white suit. He's got a few like weird tattoos on him and stuff, but he comes down and pulls up a chair and has a conversation with Constantine because, as the movie tells us, he's the one soul that the devil would come up from hell himself to claim instead of leaving it to someone else. But that, like, the last 20 minutes of this movie, I think, are the selling point for Constantine.
Oh, yeah. No, I totally agree. It's even when I first watched this, um, the last act, last full act of this film, when things really ramp up, are probably the best part of this movie, and the best narrative and just everything about it because, you see Constantine take this dramatic, for reasons he takes this dramatic act, not even really thinking about what it means for him. He's doing it actually selflessly, which came up earlier about it, which I love because he doesn't really seem to consciously do it for that reason. He's just doing it for using the devil basically. um Gabriel, what they do with that character was also very cool. How things play out, again, we don't want to give spoilers too much, but let's just say the resolution to this film and the final ending of this film of how things play out stuck with me still to this day. I don't remember too much else about this film, but I remember the last scenes that Constantine had, that whole last segment in the hospital basically. I remembered all of that, and especially how this ended, because I thought that was an interesting approach and interesting motivations happening at the end there. And I loved that. I was like, that's different. I'm like, didn't see that one coming.
Right, and it's also, again, kind of tiptoeing around the resolution, but normally when the devil is defeated, I'm thinking of, The Devil's Advocate or any
Yeah,
number of these movies. When the devil is like pissed off or defeated or he has to go back to hell or go back empty-handed, there's always like this screaming, rage, or he like bursts into a ball of flame or something. That doesn't happen here because you realize that this guy has all of eternity and people don't. So he's annoyed. He feels kind of like salty because he was sort of on some level outsmarted, but he's like, I can wait. And he even gives himself a little bit of a boost to tip the scales more in his favor as
right.
to, making sure he has a happy ending, even if no one else does. It's interesting, the storyline that this comes from in the comics. I was disappointed because I loved that storyline so much that when I
Mm,
saw them planting the seeds of it in this movie, I thought, "Oh, they're gonna tell this story," and no, they don't. But for those who I don't know if anyone's gonna go out and read the comics, I'm gonna kinda spoil what happens in the comic storyline
mhm.
because even if you were to pick them up, it's such a great story and a journey getting there that, nothing I say can really ruin it. But no, Constantine gets lung cancer, and the devil is like really itching to take him. So what he does is he sells his soul to, I think, two other demons in hell. And so when Satan comes to collect, the other two are like, wait a second. No, we've got a claim on him. No, we've got a claim on him. So Constantine gets to basically get out of it because they're going to spend, thousands of years squabbling over who has the rights to Constantine's soul. So that's very funny. And then later, this rake at the gates of hell storyline is basically like it happened a few years later. Basically, what happens when they figure out how to uh, break their disagreement.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, so it's very, very fun. And that's sort of the disappointment of this movie is they cram so much of it and so many of these characters in here that but they leave it sort of open for a sequel that it's like, I don't know if Warner Brothers had any confidence in this being a franchise. You've got all these pretty big stars in there, even people who were on the way up, like Jaimin Hansu playing Papa Midnight, Shia
Mm,
LaBeouf,
mhm.
that you're wondering, is this supposed to be their next big franchise? This is still 3 years before, or no, this is the same year. My gosh, this is
Yeah.
Batman Begins, but even then, I don't know that they knew when they were putting this together that it would become like a comic book renaissance or anything. So, how did you feel about that? Did you feel like this was being set up for a sequel, or it was like, if anything happens with it, we have a back door into another story, but this might be it?
It no, it felt like they were walking on eggshells for an IP, but
Mm,
it wasn't fully confident in it, but it does feel kind of like, ooh, we can have that alternative running franchise along with Batman, which is our bread and butter of sorts. It surprises me that I think the budget between this film is touted at, some sources say between 70 and 100 million, some say 100 million dollars, which, folks, 20 years ago, 100 million dollars was a bit of a risk. So they were putting money behind this, I think, thinking that they might get the jump, because even though it was what we said, like 3 years before Iron Man. With Hollywood, things are rolling around far longer than we ever hear stories of. So I suspect Warner Brothers was like, oh crap, it sounds like Marvel, is on the upswing. We got to start cranking out some products here. And I really think that they were hinging not a huge amount on it, but I think that it was kind of set up as, yeah, we've got a world to play in, and hopefully this does well enough to where we can do a sequel. But at the same time, yeah, I think it's no loss either. Is like, well, if it doesn't, we've got Batman to fall.
And it's the one weird thing is because now we think of Keanu Reeves as, oh, he's John Wick, right?
Mhm.
But in this era, he was 2 years out of being done with The Matrix, right? Because I think
Right.
Matrix
Yep.
was 99, the second one was like a couple years later, and they filmed 2 and 3 back to back. So this is like, okay, he's almost like lost in the wilderness. Like, what can I do as my next big thing? And this never really went anywhere. And so you fast forward to, John Wick era, and now he's kind of rebeen. There's been a Keanu sans. What struck me as strange is that there was the Papa Midnight's Club is very Jaimin Hansu plays a guy who runs a club that both like angels and demons can kind of hang out at, and
Right.
there's like a truce, there's a pact there.
Mhm.
You can't really do anything. Very different from the comics. Papa Midnight is not Constantine's friend. But it struck me as, oh, this is shades of the Continental, that
Mhm.
kind of
Oh,
neutral
yeah.
game where
No.
people can come and hang out, and they just have to agree not to kill each other.
No, I watching Constantine throughout, I'm like, this has seedlings of John Wick. Not just the club being the Continental, but just the way Constantine is once he gets the gun and he starts fighting. The way, just watching all of this, I'm like, man, this is definitely has some familiar territory to it for sure.
Demons
Um
killed my dog.
yeah.
Um,
But I mean, it's like he walked so he could run later in John Wick. Um but yeah, it's one of those things where you could see it. And yeah, we had the Keanu Sans, and Travolta had that as well. And I like that. I like, because you have these talented actors who were young and they ended up falling into, a franchise or whatever. But when that franchise ends, like you said, they're kind of lost in the wilderness, because now that's the biggest thing around their neck, and they can't shed that. So that's what Constantine felt as well, in a way, where you mentioned it before. It was kind of, Shia LaBeouf, trying to get into maybe a more mature thing. I think this was Keanu also trying to shake the the Neo baggage with him, and try to show, hey, I can do other things besides just the Matrix, because the Matrix took up so much of his earlier career. We've seen that even with Jennifer Lawrence. Jennifer Lawrence got picked for, the Hunger Games, and she had to take, it took her a little while to shake that Hunger Games vibe. I mean, Mark Hamill had to take voice acting for a while, jump into voice acting in order to shed the Luke Skywalker angle. So you've got talented folks who end up getting this kind of around their neck, and while you can embrace it, you're like, I want to do other things.
well, it is weird because like with Jennifer Lawrence, she started off like her big break was Winter's Bone. I mean, I think
Well,
she was
yeah.
nominated for an Oscar, and
Hmm.
it's like a serious drama. Like, oh, who's this, you know,
Hmm.
Kentucky girl doing these great dramatic parts, and then she lands the Hunger Games, and then that's kind of like her defined for a while. And it's funny because Francis Lawrence ended up directing a bunch of the Hunger Games
Yeah.
sequels. So like Lawrence and Lawrence, but yeah, it's funny to think about this because there was rumblings somewhat recently about possibly doing a Constantine sequel, which I I'm of mixed feelings about it because Keanu Reeves has been in the John Wick mode for so long. I mean, now he's even doing a cameo. I don't even know if it's a cameo because no one's seen it yet, but the ballerina, right, with
Oh, yeah.
Ana de
Hmm.
Armas, he shows up in that, and he's still doing the gruff, like,
Well, it's in the same world though, so that's that I could see because it's still John Wick universe. So
right, but that's what I'm saying. Like he's still playing that
that way, yeah.
character, and he's been
Mhm.
doing it for over a decade now, I think.
Yeah, just
Um,
about.
but Constantine and John Wick are two different people, and I just don't know if, like, I don't know if I want to see a really old John Constantine.
I
Like, would
think
he just be John Wick, but he's doing magic tricks?
no, I think he could pull it off now. Actually, I think he'd do a better John Constantine, a weathered, old, experienced John Constantine than the younger John Constantine that he did because of all the other roles he's taken, but just in general, being a more mature actor and learning a few things. I don't think he'd be another John Wick. I think with the Constantine sequel, it'd be more who they pick for the lead because they'd probably try to play an angle of handoff because then you can make
Oh,
more. You know what I mean? They could make more sequels after that necessarily. I mean, and Keanu, he recognizes age. I mean, even though he got into this young, he still recognizes the age. Part of the reason, the only motivations to take John Wick 4 was he's like, you killed John Wick at the end of 4. He's like John Wick. That if I remember reading that correctly, because he was almost done, I think, with just 3, and then it was like, if I come back, John Wick dies at the end. I don't, however you do it, but he's like, they done with that character, and then they give him some money for Ballerina, but Ballerina was planned while Wick 4 was going on. So I'm like, yeah, okay. But no, I mean, I think he could do I'd like to see him do a weathered, older Constantine if they wanted to do that. Tough part with doing the Constantine sequel now is because just for the exact reason why I think it was okay to accept his younger one, his older one now, we've gotten this other Constantine who was around. I didn't realize that the Constantine TV show, the one season, was 10 years. It was 10 years ago because I
yeah.
was used to seeing that character because they had the one season. It got canceled, unfortunately, because I really loved that version of John Constantine, but they brought him back for Legends of Tomorrow, which then got canceled, which I felt bad because he was still in that. But we've had that portrayal now, so it would be tough, I think, to try to sell Keanu again as Constantine, unless you do some odd thing where they're both in, in it.
Well, it's a comic book movie, so I'm sure they could do. This is what they're
Multiverse.
probably going to do. They'll do like a multiverse thing where they get Keanu Reeves meeting up with Matt Ryan. Because I agree, like my ultimate fantasy, and I don't advocate this, but imagine if there was like an AI version where they took Matt Ryan's John Constantine and put him into the 2005
Oh,
Constantine movie, replace Keanu Reeves. I think it would be perfect. I think everyone would talk about it because I think that's the kind of the central problem, unfortunately, is this performance
mhm.
plus the look, even if it was just, because Constantine is such a British character. I think it's very rare that non-Brits actually have written him in the, almost 40 years he's been around. It's almost like they're James Bond, for like occult comics. But yeah, if it's like, oh, he's just visiting LA, or, he gets called to LA for this, to check out this spear or something,
Right.
there could be something to that. But yeah, I would love to see. I don't even know if I finished watching all of Constantine in 2015.
Mhm.
I think they put it out on DVD. I'll have to look that up because I watched that not thinking anything of it because like it was on NBC at the time.
Right. Yeah.
I'm
It
like,
was. Yeah.
it's an NBC Friday night TV show, means no one has faith in it. It's going to be garbage. But I watch, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is note perfect, just about.
Yeah, Matt Ryan is wonderful as Constantine. I mean, they even had him do a cameo in Lucifer, the movie, the
Oh,
TV show Lucifer. They had
right.
him do. I watched everything except I didn't check out the last season. My wife and I loved the series. We watched that together. I still got to watch the last season of that. That when they brought it back for one more season because they ended things on kind of a cliffhanger. But they even have him do a short cameo, which made me want to go back. And that's when I watched the series. And then right after I did that, they brought him into Legends of Tomorrow. But they had to make a cameo Lucifer. Like, I love this character, and seeing him, and then having actually read some of the comics later, I'm like, Matt Ryan nails it. And you're right. I think if you take the Matt Ryan John Constantine, it's not just performance, it's the look and everything. If you take that portrayal of the character and put him in this story that we have the Keanu Constantine in, you're right. People are talking about it more. I think you've got sequels coming out with this and everything if you had that portrayal. And it's weird because with the budget they have, because I thought maybe, okay, they chose LA and that because budget constraints, maybe they didn't want to shoot in London or whatnot. And maybe that was still the case, or they didn't have faith that they could sell a British hero to the Western audiences, which could very well have been as well. They're thinking. I think they
Yeah.
could, but you know what I
Well,
mean?
especially because I mean, I'm thinking of timelines because this is a year before Casino Royale with
Right.
James Bond Renaissance. If this movie had come out if this movie had been in pre-production 3 years later, like in
Mhm.
2008,
It's a
where you've
different
got
movie.
comic
Yeah.
books and you've got James Bond being cool again, I think you totally could have done a comics authentic Constantine story. Man, it just really is about timing with this thing.
It is. I think it is because that would have been the trend. I mean, you would have had Casino Royale being the hot thing. You know, Batman Begins comes off of your success. You suddenly have Iron Man and the MCU starting to really take shape. So I think they get confidence, put some backing and some little more effort behind it. And yeah, I think it just misses the mark by 3 years. If it gets in there, you look at the trends and suddenly knowing Hollywood, they would be like, oh, we could do a British guy. Oh, we could do the, never mind the original, source material is British. We could still, and yeah, it's one of those things where I think even Keanu, if he gets this a few years later, he may have done better in this role than he did because you're right. He's literally coming off of marketing and everything for the Matrix yet. And so at least he's not playing Neo here. He does try
Right.
to play, he's playing a different character than Neo. He The toughest part, and I think it's where Matt Ryan nails it, and why I think older Keanu could do Constantine, younger Keanu couldn't quite do it because you don't buy the grizzled asshole aspect of Constantine from Keanu, no matter how hard you try. You look at him and it's just, I'm not buying it. You've got to have a little bit more experience of jadedness in here. He just did not feel, I don't feel he's jaded and cynical enough in this Constantine.
Well, I mean, that's a very good point because you have flashbacks to his, when he was a teenager and he
Right.
was in like a psychiatric hospital, he's getting electroshock and everything. But then he's like, yeah, that was 20 years ago. I'm like, so you're 35 and you're always throughout this entire movie, he's pasty like Neo was, like
Mhm.
severe pancake makeup mode. But he also doesn't have an ounce of stubble or facial hair. He's so like clean shaven. He still looks really boyish. And I think that's what Matt Ryan he had. He had that bit of scruff. He might have been around the same age as Keanu Reeves when he did this, but he looked like he had several more miles on him. He looked like a guy who'd spent 20 years like battling demons and hating himself.
Yeah, and that's the tough thing. And again, I'm not trying to slight Keanu because
Hmm.
I think for at the time and when he was in this and everything, but I think that it was too early with this film. I think if it would have marinated a little bit more, and with him, he does fine. I just don't think he was right for the role for the type of character he's playing because you can't buy it. And if you don't buy that, like Constantine, if you watch the first episode of Constantine, you look at Matt Ryan, you're like, yeah, that's a guy who literally has been to hell and back numerous times, who has seen some shit, who's done some stuff, who has the weight of all of his sins, especially one in particular, just weighing on him constantly. You feel that with Matt Ryan's performance and the kind of don't give a shit, pardon my French, attitude that he has for a lot of things versus Keanu's in this one in Constantine. You still feel like he's got some good side to him. You feel like he's still seeing some hope in the world. You're still seeing, and you're like, yeah, I mean, it's fine, but for the world that he's in and the type of character he's supposed to be, it just doesn't quite fit. And so if you don't get that, it's
That is
harder to sell.
That's a really excellent point because even if you think about his career leading up to this, I mean, even the Matrix movies with her like all dark and techno and everything, Keanu's still the hero. He's still the savior of mankind. He still has that kind of optimism, even when he's like a drone working at his desk, like something could be better. And then you go back to like, Bill and Ted and all this other stuff, the kind of lighthearted stuff. Um, when you get to John Wick, it's so, I think one of the reasons it's so successful is it's so striking how really lost and kind of like angry and sad this character is throughout all of those movies. I've only watched all of them, I think, once, but he's not like joking around. If he makes a joke, it's like, it's almost
It's
like he's like angrily making a joke, and here he's very charismatic. Even as dour a character as he is, again, he has a great look, like the bit where he's coming back from the other side, and then Rachel Weisz opens the door, and he's like sitting there smoking, like
Mhm.
smoldering in his living room. The bit where he's holding her under the water in the bathtub, like all those are really cool and great scenes, but it's the delivery of the dialogue like undercuts all of that goodwill the moment he starts to, like, it's almost like in Devil's Advocate where he's like, "Not fucking guilty." I'm like, "Oh, no. No."
Well, also the problem with that is when you've got Pacino chewing up every single bit of the scenery, you might as well just not even try to act because you're just like, whatever I do will not matter because Pacino is being Pacino, and why am I even here? I'm just taking up a space in the frame until Pacino is done delivering, what Pacino does.
Hooah.
Hoorah! So I mean, in his defense for that, but no, yeah, I mean, and again, I think he was just a little young to be cast in the Constantine role, and I think they did it because he was, the hot commodity from Matrix and that. So they're like, yeah, we could just, when I think had you given him some time to do some more of his indie stuff, like was it My Own Private Idaho type of
That was
or
before this.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, I know, but I mean, go back to
Oh,
that.
more of that. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, do more of that, kind of go back to that and then come in. I think he does a better job. I think he was just too soon coming off of Neo to really be to pull this off.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I know we've been kind of like ragging and analyzing on him. I mean, I think that's the thing is there's no part of me that thinks that he wasn't trying or they didn't care.
Right.
I think he did, what was asked of him. And I think again, this movie is worth watching for especially all the elements around him
Mhm.
and all the elements involving him before he talks. Um,
It's just a cat. It's one of those things where it's not the fault of the actor. It was just miscasting. They put forth their great effort, and I have no problems with him himself in it. I just think he was the wrong pick for it. Nothing, to slight him. I just think the casting director should have picked someone else for this role who would have more fit the bill than what Keanu, and his style is where he was at the time for that.
And this gets into, I mean, I don't want to play alternate casting because
No.
I would have to think back too hard about who was hot in 2005, but you don't get $100 million budget for a movie unless you have a Keanu caliber star. So I can see strictly from a business standpoint, like, oh, we got Keanu Reeves, let's lock him in,
Right.
make it work.
Man,
um,
man, could you imagine Daniel Craig put in the role
no,
of
no, he's too pretty. I mean,
he's too pretty too, yeah.
I like his Bond, and I think that in some of the, in Casino Royale and some of the other Bonds after that, he really can put in the kind of the tortured, like disillusioned international spy. I won't get into the last couple of Bond movies, yikes, but I think, yeah, he's still a little too pretty and a little too young.
Actually
He almost falls into that Keanu trap that's here.
actually, you could have almost, pardon me for even invoking the name, Johnny Depp. If you wanted to go with a Western Constantine, Johnny
Uh,
Depp, I think.
yeah, yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
Ooh,
It'd be the look, the attitude, the look he could get. The attitude might be a little challenging for him, but
yeah, I don't know. Maybe. I think you broke my brain there, Mark, because now I'm just, I, yeah, I'm short circuiting on the inside. I can't respond. So I think it's a good place to wrap up.
I would say so. Yeah.
I'm seeing the poster. Johnny Depp is Constantine, and I'm alternately like throwing up and passing out. I don't know what's going on,
Well, the
but
problem is you can't see him now. Now you're just, when I see that, the minute I said it, and now I'm just seeing Captain Jack on there.
I'm just seeing Johnny Depp having to change the sheets. Anyway,
Ooh.
yeah, too soon.
Uh,
Anyway. All right, Mark the movie man Krawcheck. I didn't give you a proper introduction.
oh,
I'm going
that's
to give you a
fine.
proper outro.
I don't
But
need one.
yes, you do. Well, no, you're a man that needs no introduction. That's it.
Man, it needs no
But
introduction. There you go.
all right, but thanks for hanging out and talking Constantine. You
Yeah.
know, it's always fun getting into these like adaptations and comics movies to see what they do. Even if you're not familiar with the source material, you know, that much, you're not wedded to it, which is kind of a good thing to do going into these kinds of adaptations because by nature it seems like they have to change things. But yeah.
Well, and I'm going to say that the 4K transfer, this is one of the better 4K transfers I've seen because the special effects, even in this, they're 20 years old. They look pretty damn good for 4K. So they either did some remastering or cleaning up or something because I've seen other films from this period, from that kind of span of the early aughts that are 4K transfer where you can see the special effects, especially CGI. You're like, oof. But in here, there's some spots that it's still rough, but it looks good in 4K.
Yeah.
It looked really good.
Well, I think it's partially because I know we're wrapping up, but it's partially that there is a mix of practical and CG, but
Right.
they really put a lot of effort into that practical. Like the opening kind of big Constantine introduction where he's performing an exorcism,
Oh yeah.
sort of in the barrio. He gets this group of people together to help him rig up a mirror over this girl and draw the demon into the mirror and then have the mirror like crash on the street outside. That all looked really good. And when Keanu was like pulling the rope to get the mirror up, and
Yeah.
like it's stuck, and you can really see him straining. It's a great bit of like physical drama, and it's a great way to open the movie. And this movie also ends spectacularly, as we've talked. And even some of the stuff in the middle is pretty cool, but it's a bit uneven. But again, I think I'm going to put that unfortunately on Mr. Reeves' shoulders.
Yeah. I would agree, just a little too early in his career, I think, for this.
Yeah. So here's to the alternate universe version where we get Keanu Reeves at 50 playing John Constantine for the first time. Nice and grizzled introduction to this character. But, all right, sir. Well, I think that's everything. Mark, tell us where we can find you. What are you doing?
Specialmarkproductions.com for all your movie man needs. There's links there to the YouTube, the Patreon, the podcast, which you're on. Occasionally I'll do a written review. That's where you want to go, and there's links from there to all the stuff I do when I can. So we've got a podcast. I just got to finish up editing. We did this past week, which was interesting on Girl Gang. I'm working on an interview I did this week as well with a director of a interesting Scottish Irish horror film that came out on VOD this past week called The Baby in the Basket. I got to interview Nathan Shepka. So that was a fun interview to do. And yeah, so specialmarkproductions.com.
Awesome. All right, sir. Well, thank you again, and thank you all out there for watching / listening. However, you're experiencing this podcast. If you like the show, please like, subscribe, follow Mark. Definitely, all of his information is down below. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thank you and take care.
Whoa.
He didn't say whoa.
He did.
He didn't say it in this movie.
No.
Hey everyone, Ian here. I know, long time no see. But if you like the video you just watched, feel free to subscribe to Kicking the Seat right here, and also check out the playlist and recommended video right here. Thanks for watching.